Hello, I'm Pastor Gray, pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church of Longview, Texas. Thank you for tuning in to our services. I'm praying that God would do something in your heart as you listen to the message. The number one core value here at Emmanuel is the preeminence of Christ, that in all things he might have the glory. God bless you. Enjoy the service.
Take your Bibles, go to 2 Kings chapter 6, and please let your heart open up and let God do something in your heart. We will be giving an invitation, and when we do that, the altars are going to be open, and I'm going to ask us to make an altar. Balcony, that place right there in between the front and the back and the front section, let's make that an altar. Let's use this altar. Make your pew an altar. Let's see what God does. 2 Kings chapter 6 is where we're at. You'll find that 2 Kings chapter 6 opens up with a miracle, and it opens up with the axe head. The iron, the Bible said, did swim, and that you'll find that in verse number 6. So it opens up that the prophets, the school of the prophets, the sons of the prophets, this Bible college found in the Old Testament, is where the sons of the prophets went, and you're going to find out that the dormitory grew to where they had no more place to stay. So they said, hey, it's too straight for us, and it doesn't mean strict, it just means it's confined. We need to build a bigger barracks, if you will. So they did that, and in doing that, the guy with the axe head came off. It fell, and he said, hey, it was borrowed. I got to get this thing back. You come to verse number 8, and that's where we're going to pick up. Look at verse number 8. Then the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. Look at it. I love this. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing. And he called his servants and said unto them, will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? This king truly thought, somebody's betraying us. Because every time we make plans to go attack the nation of Israel, all of a sudden they find out our plan, and now they're like, oh, good night. The king of Syria truly felt like, boy, somebody in this camp is a traitor. Somebody sneaking across the enemy lines and telling the nation of Israel where we're going to be. If you'll look down in continue here in verse number 12, and one of the servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. That's how you know this is a southern book. Fetch him. That I may fetch him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host. And they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And the servant said unto him, alas, my master. And here's the phrase that is the sermon for this morning. Can you read it with me? Alas, my master. Read the last four words. Ready? How shall we... Oh, let's say that again. How shall we do? That is a very important, because that's the title for today. 16. He answered, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. The story in and of itself is a very intriguing story, because after this, you'll find out that the Syrian army was blinded. They were led, and as they were led, they didn't know where they were going, and they ended up right in the middle of the camp of Israel. The enemy was delivered. to the nation of Israel. And then all of a sudden, what happened from there is they gave them bread and they released them. But inside this text, and you back off the mains just a hair, if you will. Inside the text, you have the fact that this servant steps out. And when this servant steps out, all of a sudden, he sees an army that is bigger than the moment he was in. He feared. This fear of what he temporarily saw was paralyzing. It was something that was more than what he could take. And so this servant sees this, and then all of a sudden, Elisha prays in verse 17, and he says, Lord, can you open his eyes and show him that there's more for us than for that army out there? That we've got a bigger army? Now, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. I'm going to ask you to take everything that you fear in 2021. You see, a holiday puts you to sleep from Thanksgiving to New Year's. And many of you pushed off all what you had to face for the next year. You pushed it all the way off. But when you woke up January 2nd, all of a sudden, you're standing there looking at 2021, and right now, this is by far the most depressing month of the year. Because you're standing here and you're going, I'm looking at another mountain. I'm looking at another repeat. And oh my goodness, look at everything we have to get done in 2021. Boy, that rhymed. Look at everything we have to get done, and sometimes it just hits you and you got to write that down. That's a bumper sticker right there. So you think I'm kidding? Done in 2021. You will see that again. And so you're sitting here going, man, look at everything that we got to get done. I won't say 2021. And as you look at it, here's what I want to pull from the text. And there's such a correlation between what we just read and the year we're getting ready to experience. No, you're not going to step out and the Taliban is not going to be surrounding the church. There's not that physical war that we're fighting. But there is a spiritual correlation between the life we're living and this story. There are three players in this story, if I could. There is the king of Syria. That's life. That's the life you're getting ready to live. It may not be this week, it may not be next week, or probably you've already experienced it, but you step out and now you're looking at life, and that Syrian army has surrounded you. You walked out, it was any other morning. Maybe it's going to happen, maybe it is happening, but the king of Syria, that's life. Elisha, that is you and I. That's you and I. You and I are the ones that are living in faith. However small it is, you're living in faith. And then you have the servant. That can be you and I. The servant did not ask, what shall we do? That's very important for this morning. The servant did not ask what. He asked how. You see, what shall we do means that we're hopeless. What shall we do means we have no safety net. What shall we do means that we are without God's attention. You see, when you and I look at the armies that face us and we look at life that surround us, there is this part of us, because it's flesh and because we fear and we don't want to fail, that we will step out and go, what are we going to do? I mean, how many times have you been there in 2020? What are we going to do? I have no money to pay the bill. What are we going to do? My son or my daughter is causing me pain. What are we going to do? All of a sudden, it's like the job is not what it needs to be. What are we going to do? The pink note, what are we going to do? And as a believer, it is easy to live in fear. Listen, fear is not of God. Did you hear that? Fear is not of God. 2 Timothy 1:7 says this, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a what? Sound mind. That's what we want. This servant stepped out and he saw this army compassing him about, and it was bigger. And he said, oh my soul, how shall we do? I believe that fear sometimes can cause us to see things that do not exist. Black Bart, and Brother Horner, I put this in here just for you. And I expect you to wear your hat and your overcoat. Yes. And Black Bart was a professional thief whose very name struck fear as he terrorized the Wells Fargo stage line. From San Francisco to New York, his name became synonymous with the danger of the frontier. Between 1875 and 1883, he robbed 29 different stagecoach crews. Amazingly, Bart did it all without firing a shot. Because a hood hid his face, no victim ever saw his face. He never took a hostage and was never trailed by the sheriff. Instead, Black Bart used fear to paralyze his victims. His sinister presence was enough to overwhelm the toughest stagecoach guard. This was fear. Louis Pasteur is reported to have had an irrational fear of dirt and infection, so much so he refused to shake hands. Fear. President and Mrs. Benjamin Harrison were so intimidated by the newfangled electricity installed in the White House, they didn't dare touch the switches. If there were no servants around to turn off the lights when the Harrisons went to bed, they slept with them on. Fear. It is said that the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin so feared for his safety that his residence in Moscow contained 8 bedrooms. Each night, Stalin chose a bedroom at random to ensure that no one knew exactly where he was sleeping so he could wake up the next morning. Fear. But here is the difference between the fear of a lost person and what should be the fear of a saved person. You see, because we're still in the body, there still is this, oh no, what shall we do? You see, many believers live 2020, and every time they faced a situation, it was, what shall we do? What is going to happen? What is going to be the outcome? And there is this fear that we live in the darkness of this helplessness. Rather, we should say like the servant, how shall we do? Still fear, because the man of God acknowledged the fear and said, hey, be not afraid. I've only got a few moments, and I'm going to ask that you not sit there and just say, well, it's another day in the house of God. It's not another day. It's an eternal truth that can be plugged into your life that you can live by to where you walk through this coming year, not a slave to fear because you don't have that many bedrooms. Not a slave to fear. You see, what happened to the servant was startled at what he saw, but was not defeated by what he saw because he knew Elisha and he understood that although he saw the army, he said, alas, master, how shall we do? There was no in him what? It was how. I love the Word of God. I love the King James Bible. I love the fact that every word is placed there and it has been preserved for you and I, and that when you look at the how, I think the best position you can be in as a believer in 2021 is to transfer your Christian life. I'm getting ready to ask you to make a commitment for 2021 that you take this world that you've been living in of panic, paralyzing fear, of what are we going to do? How many times have you asked in 2020 when the news came of what are we going to do? What are we going to do? News comes for a family, a family situation, and in the midnight hour and the tears, what are we going to do? When the job starts downsizing or they start turning, whatever. How many times have you made the phone call or you walked through the door and your spouse said, what's the matter? You tell them, and then what are we going to do? I don't want to live in paralyzing fear. I made up my mind several weeks ago when I came across this passage that, Bob, you're going to move from what do we do to how shall we do? That's an amazing threshold that I'm going to ask every believer to walk across. The servant was overwhelmed, but the servant was not overcome. The servant saw the physical, but he had not yet seen the spiritual. Various situations that required God to come through. That Elisha was no stranger. Elisha carried the reputation. His very first step was at the river where his master was taken up and where the chariots came down and got Elijah, and everybody knew from that point that here is a man that regardless of what situation he got himself into, that his God was going to come through. 2 Kings 2:21, God healed a drought. 2 Kings 2:24, God sent 2 she-bears out of the woods to tear apart 42 mocking children. 2 Kings chapter 3, God caused a blurring of the vision of the Moabites, that where they should have attacked and could have won, when they looked, guess what they saw? They saw the waters like blood, and they said to themselves, good night. There's a massacre taking place on the other side, and we better get out of here. God did this. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1, God caused a little cruse of oil to sustain a widow lady for life. 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 1, God gives a barren womb a child, and then takes that child when that child dies and does something amazing after that brain aneurysm, and guess what he does? Raises that child back from the dead. 2 Kings chapter 4, God takes a poisonous pot of stew and makes it a healthy meal for everybody to eat. 2 Kings chapter 5, God heals Naaman by having him wash 7 times in the Jordan River. 2 Kings chapter 6, God causes the axe head to swim. You see, anybody that was involved with Elisha, it wasn't, what are we going to do? It was, how shall we do? All of a sudden, it was, hey, God, hey, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I know you're going to do it. This is what I want you to move to. This is where our church needs to pick up in one accord, and we just need to move. No longer should we be shocked by what we see when we walk out of our life on any given morning. Replace the what with how. When you face something and somebody in the family says, what are we going to do? Stop and say, oh, remember, it's not what, it's how shall we do. No longer should there be panic at your kitchen table. No longer should there be panic on the cell phone. To the point that God's on trial. No. No matter what situation Elisha found himself, God came through. God came through the drought. God came through the mockers. God came through the Moabites. God came through the widow with only a little bit of oil. God came through the barren womb. God came through when he raised the dead son. God came through with the poisonous pot of stew. God came through for the leprous Naaman. God came through by having the thieving servant take on the leprosy. God came through with the lost axe head, and God will come through for you. God will come through for you. And many times we live in despair. We live in defeat. We live in despondency. We live in darkness when we should walk to the light of this world and say, God, here's the situation I'm in. God, I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't know what you're going to do, but I do know this. How are we going to do it this time? How are we going to do it this time? I'm going to give you 4 things, and then we're headed to the house. The first thing I want to tell you is this. Get ready for situations in 2021 that are overwhelming. Didn't you like that coming into today? Don't you like that? In fact, Freddie and Melanie, God has told me you're having triplets. Okay, and get ready. I want you to look at the people around you and realize this. Somewhere sitting in that pew, somewhere in your neighborhood, somewhere in your family, somewhere in your job is going to be something that is going to be overwhelming. And when you face it, I want you to start writing it down. Here recently in the college, I've been giving at the beginning of the year, don't quit cards. A couple of years ago, and I mentioned in a sermon several months back that I said, right on the back every time you wanted to quit. And a couple of years ago, I was giving away diplomas up here, and I shook a hand of a graduate. And as they shook my hand, they put in my hand a piece of paper that on the back of that thing was about 15, 16 times. I got over to the reception. I was like, good grief. Good night. What a long year. And they reminded me that was just a semester. In 2021, I want you to get you a piece of paper, and I want you to start listing the Syrian armies that you see. At the end of 2021, I want you to be able to look back and say this: God made the iron swim. God took the dead boy with the aneurysm in his head and he brought him back to life. God took the drought and he gave us water. God took the leprous king and made him whole. God. And at the end of 2021, with one accord as Emmanuel Baptist Church, there needs to be a theme that goes through our brotherhood and our sisterhood that says this: no longer are we a what are we going to do? How shall we do? Get ready. Get ready. Miss Kelly and I were praying this morning before church in the office. And I said, I have no idea what this year holds. But I'm picking up my faith. And I'm walking across the threshold to where I'm no longer going to be that servant that panics. But I just simply say, how shall we do? The second thing I want to tell you is this: situations will always be bigger than you, but not God. Situations will always be bigger than you, but not God. I love this. I've been waiting to use this illustration. Jackson, can I use you? Would that be okay? Come up here, Jackson. Stand right there. All right? Now, you're a little guy. Would you agree with that? Okay. All right. Just want to make sure you agree with the fact you're a little guy. All right? Okay. As long as you think you realize you're a little guy. Ben, can I use you? You knew it was coming. Now, he's a bigger guy. There you go. He's a bigger guy. And life, if we're not careful, is wrapped up this way. Stand there, take your fist, and point it at him. There, perfect. And it's the attitude sometimes is, are you scared? I fully expected him to say, no, I'm not scared. Turn around, look at him, and just shake like, yeah, no, with your hands. And okay, keep going. Hey, how many times did you keep going? I mean, like, whoa, okay. How many times did you live this way? How many times did you wake up and I woke up and all of a sudden it was like, what? What? And it's like, what? I'm making sure he's going to take a nap this afternoon. And what? What? Hey, what we need to do is stop, you're making me tired. What we need to do is this. Luke, come on, man. Come on, get over there. Hey, you and I, now you take your fist and do that to Ben. Many a time. And this is the drought. This is the axe head. This is the leprous king. It is so simple, and don't stumble at the simplicity. Fall into the amazing God. And when that situation turns around, where you are no match for the situation is no match for the God. No longer should it be lived, what are we going to do? But it needs to be, how? How? Not what. What gives a helpless, hopeless, maybe it's not, no. How shall we do? First thing I would tell you is that thank you guys, you'll always face situations out of your control. The situations will always be bigger than us, but not God. Number 3, you'll always be startled. You'll always be startled. You see, as long as you're trapped in this flesh, you'll always be startled. But don't be stymied. You'll always be overwhelmed, but don't be overcome. You'll always have those moments to where you have to come to grips with this. No, this is not good. Them people got blood in their eyes. This is not good. You'll always be in those situations to where, hey, man of God, my son came from the field and he said, my head, and now he's dead. What are we going to do? Listen, but get over the overwhelming effect of what you see by the confidence in the God you can't see. Please, dear Christian, the biggest thing I can tell you in 2021 is this. You're not getting out of this year without a Syrian army staring you dead in your eyes. You're not getting out of it. But neither are you getting out of this year without a God in heaven coming through. We sorrow, but not as those who have no hope. And what it may look like is the end, and I don't even know what's going to come next. Listen, I have no idea what is going to happen standing right here, but I do know this. I know that there is a God that's going to come through in some unique way. And I will tell you on the end of this statement of what I've just tried to tell you is this. He won't come through the same way next time that he did this time. You can't chart him. Did y'all hear that? You can't chart him. You don't know what he's going to do. You can't even speculate on what he's going to do. Because once we start speculating, then we create a box. And when we create a box, then we're saying, God, you got to fit in that box because I've already thought up how it needs to be done. Now you just do it how. No, there needs to come a point to where when you face a situation, you don't put your mind, you just simply say, God, I'm scared right now. How shall we do? How are you going to get it done? How many would agree that in 2020, that you faced a situation and you finally gave up? You were so on the mat, you're pinned, that it's like, I don't even know how to pray. I just know I got a situation. And then all of a sudden, God came through. Would you raise your hand? Yep. That's where we want to live. How shall we do? The last thing I'm going to tell you, and then trio, if you'll come, and ladies, if you'll make your way to the instruments. I'm going to have the trio sing because I did not know. I've never heard that song before. But today I want your faith. I'm going to ask, as I reach out and I take the hook of this morning's sermon, that I want to pull you to this side. How shall we do? And stop panicking. I think that mature faith, the last thing I want to tell you is this. Your faith is maturing when your first reaction is how, not what. Your faith's maturing when all of a sudden your first reaction is how. Several weeks ago, probably about a month ago, when I was studying the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, I wanted to know. I want to know me in my faith. Where am I at? I charted different situations that I personally have faced. And I wish I could tell you that the majority of the situations that your pastor came out of the starting gate with a how. But that wasn't the case. I came out with a what. Not realizing that even in my what, God still came through. But guess who didn't enjoy the journey? Me. Because I'm sitting here worried about the details of it. When God Almighty's like, I got this. I got this. I got this. And some of us are facing pretty big things in 2021. You say, are you saying that with a crystal ball? No, I'm saying that because you're a human. You're in life. You're at the mercy of a lot of people's wills around you. And the only person you can control is you. And how hard is that sometimes? It's not what. It's how.